would encourage anyone out there who's, looking. Asia has definitely got a lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah.
Specifically for beer, I think there's a growing demand, and as it becomes more accepted amongst the mainstream in many countries and continues to grow, represents an interesting opportunity.
The beer and beverage industry is still struggling to recover from the effects of the harsh liquor lockdown imposed by the government of this country. And many of my friends and colleagues have lost their livelihoods and may have no option other than to look abroad for opportunities to earn a living. In this episode, we talk to James Addison and Paul Wessels, who both work in the beer industry in Hong Kong. They've kindly agreed to give us some insight into how things work in this exciting Southeast Asian country. For more stories from South Africans around the world that have found opportunities overseas, please follow the hashtag #SaffasAbroad on both the BeerWorld and the DrinksWorld podcast. My name is Holger Meyer, and this is BeerWorld. Welcome to the show, and today I've got Paul Wessels and James Addison on the show. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Holger.
And we are talking to these two guys because they are involved in the beer industry in Hong Kong. That sounds very romantic.
It is quite romantic.
So let's start with James. You've been in Hong Kong the longest. Where are you from, and how did you end up in Hong Kong?
Yeah, so I'm actually half American, half South African, but spent most of my life in South Africa. I left university in 2015 and pretty much immediately decided to move to Hong Kong. Had some friends here that convinced me to move out, and originally came with the idea of teaching, which quite frankly didn't last very long. So after a couple months, I made my way into the food and beverage industry, sort of as a back-end management trainee for a restaurant group that had quite a few restaurants. And then after about a year there, I got recruited into the beer industry by someone senior at the time who was still SAB Miller. And sort of during that time, they transitioned into ownership of ABI and then into Asahi. And so I think I was the first hire in Asia under Asahi, but it was still, at the time, the SAB structure.
Okay. Drop some names.
And Raymond Stark was the head of Asia at the time, but I was recruited by a guy called Federico Bogna from Italy, who at the time was head of Asia for Peroni. So Paul and I are representing here today. Drinking some Peronis.
And it's 6:00 in the afternoon there, hey?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We've had a few market visits already, so we've been around 4 or 5 bars, just checking on the quality, making sure that things are up to standard. But yeah, so after that was about almost 5.5 years ago now that I started with Asahi. And I originally started with just the brand Pilsner Urquell from Czech Republic, and that was sort of my baby in Hong Kong, and I was tasked with growing it quite significantly, which luckily happened, and then got given another brand called Kozel, also from Czech Republic. Grew that brand. We then sort of went through a merger. I started representing Peroni and Grolsch as well as brands. And it was sort of around that time, Paul, I'll let him jump in for a little bit, flew into Hong Kong from elsewhere in Asia.
Yeah, so basically I always wanted to work in beer ever since, maybe 15, 16 years old. I was born in Johannesburg, raised in Pretoria, and then studied in Stellenbosch, always with the plan of, maybe working for SAB or working in beer and internationally, hopefully. And then when I finished studying, I went to Korea also to teach English, and I spent about 2 years there. Absolutely loved it. I don't know if you've ever had someone working in beer in South Korea on the podcast, but no. I think that would be an interesting one. It's a pretty, I think the beer consumption there is not slacking. But then after 2 years there, I still wanted to work in beer, and one of my good mates who was with me at Stellenbosch moved to Hong Kong, and he is best mates with James as well. So he told me, listen, you know, one of my friends, you know, he works for, you know, Pilsner and Kozel and all these beers, like just buy a ticket and see if you can get a job, or see if you can get an interview at least. So I just, you know, bought a one-way ticket to Hong Kong, just, you know, rocked up. And then I think about 2 months after I arrived, the protest started. And then towards the end of the year, the virus started. So it was a pretty, difficult time to arrive in Hong Kong. But around, I think after 2 months, I did get an interview. And then in October, after 6 months, I got a job at a distribution company called Metabev, which distributes all the Asahi-owned brands, apart from Asahi Super Dry, or all the Asahi brands in Hong Kong at least.
The European Asahi brands.
Yeah, okay. The European ones. And so my company, basically, we also do spirits, and, you know, we have Perrier, we have Kimbo Coffee, we have Fever Tree mixers. We do a bit of everything, but I'm focused on the on-trade beer sales. So, yeah, after 2.5 years or 2 years working for Metabev now, my role is basically overseeing all the on-trade developments for the beers, yeah.
So Paul is slightly underselling his story of arrival. So before he arrived, my best friend called me and he said, I've got this guy arriving who I went to university with, great guy. You don't understand how much he loves beer. You have to give him a job. And I was like, okay, I'm interested. So Paul and I had like sort of managed to miss each other in Korea a couple times when I was there for work. Never had a run-in, but he came to Hong Kong. And I think he met me, and the first thing he said was like, I want to work in beer. Get me a job. So very quickly, I was like, okay, he's passionate, you know, he's hungry. I need to see what I can do for him. And at the time, no one was really hiring in beer. It was sort of middle of the year. No one was really looking. And I agreed to sort of take Paul on as an apprentice for 2 weeks. And Paul shadowed me in the marketplace. And we went around and I explained everything I was doing and everything the distribution company was doing. And Paul then shadowed someone else in the distribution company for 2 weeks. And this is all free of charge. Paul's working at the time. And
I got paid in beer. I got paid in free beer.
Every day there was.
Which in Hong Kong is not bad.
Yeah, it's pricey. So he's done well for himself. I essentially came to the end, and then I sort of contacted the head of the distribution company. I said, what do you think about Paul? And he's like, listen, he seems passionate, but, you know, I don't know if we have budget for him. So I called my boss overseas and I said, listen, can we unofficially pay half of his salary, because this guy is going to be hungry. He's going to get us more accounts than anyone else. And so we came up with some kind of financial plan where we were paying half of Paul's salary, and he started with the distribution company as sort of half our employee, half their employee, and refused to quit, and very quickly worked his way up in the company and proved his worth, and has been a terrier ever since, getting us the most accounts there. So it's been a climb for Paul, but he's massively done a job.
Oh, wonderful.
James has been very nice now. He's never been this nice.
No, I only got your job, Paul. Sorry. So interesting time. And then since Paul came on board, and during that time, Asahi sort of had another merger where we merged with our Asian business, the European and the Asian business merged, and I also work on Asahi Super Dry now, which is our biggest brand out here in Asia. So Asahi has a number of ventures, food, soft drinks, spirits and whiskey, and also obviously beer. But the way the company is segmented, I just work for the beer side.
And the Asahi Asia, what countries does it cover?
Everything in Asia, bar Australia and Japan. So our main markets are China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Korea. And then we sort of have a number of other smaller markets or distribution based, like Philippines, Micronesia. I think Laos and Cambodia have various distribution agreements. But it's more of a loose structure out here. We don't generally distribute directly. We go through third-party distribution. And because sort of the history of us having an Eastern Europe and a Western Europe and then an Asia, it's a lot of contracts which are not yet sort of amalgamated into one partner. So it's a job in terms of working across distribution partners for various different brands.
Yeah, which is quite a common thing in Asia to work with distribution partners, because there's every country has these laws that you won't know about unless you are from the country. Or I think Thailand has a law where you, like, if you're opening a company, 50% of that has to be owned by, a Thai national. There's all these laws that make it very difficult to set up own shop, which is why, not just in beer, but across anything really, people use distribution companies in Asia.
Okay. So it's the brewery and then a distributor, and does it go into retail? Are they dedicated liquor shops, or is it into supermarkets?
Yeah, very much so. So the way we talk about trade here is there's on trade and off trade. Specifically, on trade being bars and restaurants, etc., and off trade being convenience stores, supermarkets, hypermarkets, anything along those lines. And generally, it's sort of segmented in terms of jobs and skill sets. Obviously, different skill sets for different sides. Off-trade tends to be more key account management, where you're dealing with a very few select partners, very price-focused, a lot of promotions, etc. A lot of linkage with marketing, what we would call above the line. So, TV, billboards, etc., and linking that sort of stuff. And then on-trade, which honestly both Paul and I would say specialize a lot more in on-trade as restaurants and bars. So whether it's working with groups or single outlets, understanding their needs, the competitors, a lot of the contract stuff, looking at how to shape contracts versus competitors, whether it's listing fees or marketing payments, or various other ways of paying customers and ensuring visibility in outlets. So that's sort of the game that we play, and it's always a way of a game, I would say, against competitors on who can control the most taps and how you do that in market.
So not unlike anywhere else in the world.
I would say the only thing which you get a lot more of in Asia is exclusive contracts, which make it very difficult for smaller players to play. And also, like, if you've got split distribution and you're competing with your own brands, it's a confusing game that you're playing. So you can be playing both sides of the pitch necessarily, where you're trying to get these guys to play nice with these guys. You're investing on both sides. You don't want to overinvest. So that's the challenge here. It's very competitive, and I would say much more exclusive in Asia than in a lot of other markets.
At least Hong Kong, which I know, compared to the rest of Asia, I only really know about Hong Kong, but it's a very expensive market if you break down the investment per hectoliter, which makes it, a lot of the big players, generally what they just do is discount, which makes it really tough if you're chasing volume and chasing targets, because it's just, it's a very cutthroat, expensive industry for beer.
Yeah, for sure.
What was SAB's role? Which brands did they control?
So SAB, obviously, they sold off to ABI. And as part of the selling process, they sort of were violating European competition laws, where they controlled too much of the market in Europe. So they did a sell-off of brands and sort of, I think, said to the market, who wants to take what. And the first sell-off piece included Peroni and Grolsch as sort of the main two pieces, the main two breweries. Yeah. And the markets were UK, Italy, and Netherlands. They sort of targeted on that one. And so I think Asahi purchased that first, and that went for something like $8 billion USD, I want to say, off the top of my head. So obviously a pretty expensive piece. And then a year later, they were still sort of deciding what to dice up and which brands to dissect. And they chose the Czech Republic as being the next one, and that included the biggest brands being Pilsner, Urquell, and Kozel. There's hundreds of brands under the portfolio, so it's hard to describe them all. But essentially, those were the main two, and that included most of Eastern Europe control as well under that in terms of a number of markets. Okay. And that went for about, I think, 16 billion USD to Asahi. So big boy money.
Yeah.
We recognize those brands as being part of the B2C portfolio or the B2C premium drinks company in South Africa.
Ironically, I've been on a phone call with quite a few of them. You when you're on the group market calls, you hear the South African accent, and you're like, oh, okay. There's those guys. I went out there.
Yeah. And when last were you guys in South Africa? It's been hard to travel.
No, it was hard to travel, but as soon as they reduced the quarantine to 2 weeks, I went home. So I flew in, I think, on the 2nd of March this year. Stayed for a month and then came back, and it was actually, I didn't have any flight bans, which
miracle.
Yeah, is a miracle, because in Hong Kong, there's all these silly rules that I won't get into, but your airlines get banned if there's a bunch of COVID cases on it. So my trip actually worked out perfectly, and I had a great time in South Africa. And obviously now, if I come back for the first time after working in beer, I kept a bit of an eye out on which brands, has grown, which new international brands I've seen. Obviously, with ABI having, Stella and Budweiser now, I wasn't surprised to see it, but I saw a lot of Grolsch actually, which, especially in off trade in Tops and liquor stores, which was quite interesting. But also like some of the other local beers that grew a lot, like especially Devil's Peak. I mean, that was so good to see, because I really like their beers, but when I left and came back, they've definitely made a lot of progress, which is quite interesting.
And you, James?
Yeah, for me, about 2.5 years now since I was home. Plans to go back in December, which I'm very excited for. It's been too long.
So, James, we met when you came to Hillcrest Tops and bought a 6-pack of Pilsner Urquell, and we started chatting. You gave me your business card, which I kept, and I'm very chuffed that I did that, because doing this series about South Africans abroad, it's nice to connect with you guys and to be able to talk to South Africans working in such an exotic location. Why are you laughing? Is it?
Honestly, it's quite funny, because it was very by chance. I saw you sort of doing stuff and ask a question or two, and then we started chatting in the Tops, and you gave me your card, and I added you, I think on LinkedIn quite quickly, and then I've followed you since, and even seeing the way you've sort of grown the community of beer in South Africa has been quite interesting for me to follow along. Very obviously zoomed out perspective, but over the last 4 or 5 years. So honestly, very impressive how you've grown the beer community there, and I think it's great. South Africans abroad, I think, quite frankly, there's a lot. There's a lot, and that's driven by opportunity. At the end of the day, I know for myself, and I think for Paul, and obviously our very good friends here, and a number of other friends that are South African here, opportunity does drive you to move away to find opportunities. And we've been lucky enough to land in beer and in a foreign country where there's a lot of money and opportunity. It's been an experience, but I would encourage anyone out there who's looking. Asia has definitely got a lot of opportunity out there. Specifically for beer, I think there's a growing demand, and as it becomes more accepted amongst the mainstream in many countries and continues to grow, represents an interesting opportunity.
Your positions are permanent. Is it hard to get work permits to operate there, to work there?
I think at this very moment, I think it is quite challenging. If you have experience, obviously it helps, but I think because of the way that the last 2 years has been, especially COVID. Hong Kong, because of, COVID was everywhere, but there's a lot of South Africans going to Europe and all that. But I still think Hong Kong is very much closed down or has been closed down for new work visas, at least in this industry coming in, because, of course, they need to justify why you're hiring a foreigner over a local person. I mean, we all had to go through that, but now they turned it up a notch, which makes it a little bit more challenging, but it's definitely not impossible.
Yeah.
I don't want to, maybe I overstated it, or now it sounds like it's, very unlikely, but it's just.
I think it'll take a little bit of time for some of the restrictions to ease, specifically in Hong Kong and maybe China, in terms of work. But for Asia in general, I would say it's opening up again and definitely a possibility. Visa-wise, it's not incredibly difficult in Asia, I would say. I'd say it's reasonably common.
Because, it's one of the beauties of working in Asia, and specifically Hong Kong, is because there's so many different nationalities. You learn so much by working with people from all over the world, and you learn to understand cultural nuances, which I think is very rare if you just, live, study, work in one country. So now there has been a lot of people who left. So the flip side of discussion now, it's like we're trying to get back talent. We're trying to get back, or Hong Kong is trying to get back international talent, which in F&B, South Africans hold the, let's say, wave the flag pretty high. I think, we have a good name. We're hardworking. We're very sociable people, and I think that really helps with you getting jobs as a South African, because there's always a good connection or good connotation with, if you're being from South Africa working in beer. Your chances are someone's already met a South African working in beer.
or alcohol. We've got a lot of, I would say honestly, a lot of friends or people that we know who are South Africans working in other alcohol companies, whether it be in wine or spirits or anything like that. It's it's quite common here, and again, quite frankly, the draw for South Africans is the money and the opportunity, which Hong Kong has. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah. And in terms of the market, I don't know how much exposure you've got to the South African market, probably mainly as a consumer. But how would you describe the difference, or what are the main differences?
I'll go first. The main difference, and this, I've never worked in the beer industry in South Africa, but the thing that I picked up, at least before I left, was that the South African beer market is dominated by SAB, or now ABI, and dominated up to such a point where I think even working for them, it's almost at a point where you already have, let's say 95% market share, but you're fighting for 96, 97, where here it's, there's a lot more players where everyone has a decent piece of the pie. So it's not completely one underdog going up against the big bad wolf or anything like that. So it's very competitive, and there's a lot more players, I feel, compared to a market like South Africa that's maybe a bit more established historically. Yeah.
I'll add to Paul's comment. So Hong Kong has very loose import laws here in regards to beer. There's no extra tax. So you get a lot of sort of people trying their luck in Hong Kong in terms of import for beer. Over COVID, it's obviously been less so than normal. But in general, whether it's craft brands or relatively mainstream brands, someone's trying to bring it over here, whether it's parallel import or new. You have that sort of as a threat here more than normal because of the lax sort of import laws. So that's definitely, everyone's here, like every major player, anyone who has money, they see Hong Kong as sort of a lighthouse market for Asia. And that means you're going to spend money here and not be expected to make money. So I think versus a lot of other markets where they're more tactile and tend to be focused on profits. It's very much focused on visibility here. In terms of South Africa, I think the other major thing is off-trade versus on-trade. In South Africa, like, price of beer is very different. I mean, what's an average pint in South Africa nowadays in terms of cost?
In the bar?
35 rand?
Yeah. $40, yeah.
Yeah, so Hong Kong, we're sitting around 160 rand for a pint, which is obviously a pretty big difference. You know, in South Africa, I can remember when I was in university. A pint costing 18, 20 rand, something like that. So obviously there's been a big price hike. But in Hong Kong, it's pretty standard to see 160 rand. And honestly, upwards. I think the most expensive I've seen here is about 220, 240 rand, something like that.
And that's also why convenience stores like 7-Eleven and Circle K are so popular, because you'll have let's say the busiest bar street in Hong Kong, and then at the bottom and at the top there's a 7-Eleven where people go and buy a beer for a tenth of the price.
So I was going to touch on this. Hong Kong's drinking laws, you're allowed to drink on the street. So you've got a bar selling a draft beer for, call it whatever, 150, 160 rand. Then you've got a convenience store selling 500 ml, same size as a pint, effectively.
20 rand.
20 rand. So there's sort of merging between on-trade and off-trade, and then consumers sort of half mixing between on-trade and, maybe buying one drink at the bar and then going outside and buying 3 drinks at the 7-Eleven on the corner. You can stand with your friends outside the bar still and continue drinking. So there's a very different habit of drinkers here. And also the other thing is, obviously in South Africa you have a lot more space in your houses. So a braai, very common. Everyone brings a 6-pack or 24-pack, whatever, to a braai. Here, with there's maybe 1 or 2 friends in a group who have a rooftop that you can go have a braai. Outside of that, drinking at home is not generally a massive occasion because you can't have anyone around. It's a very small flat, and you pay an incredible price for a very small flat. So, yeah.
So unless you're obviously on a beer podcast, then you drink. Are you at home now at the office?
Yeah. I'm at my home. Paul's come around to mine. Okay. So obviously beer podcast, we have to be somewhere relatively quiet. And these are delivered for free, so we're not paying for these.
No, it's all quality checks. You just want to make sure the liquid is good enough for the market. Gotta check the stock.
And you got to entertain your distributor. So
yes, always.
We know the main brands that Asahi does. Just run us through them.
So Asahi Superdry is our biggest in Hong Kong. We do probably 110,000 hex. Peroni is number 2, and we're probably coming in at around 7,000 hex here. And then after that, it's Pilsner Quell, and that's roughly 4,000, 3,500, call it. And then we sort of start delving into the tail end, if you will, on cricket. So we got Cozell, which is probably 800 hex, 600, somewhere in there. And that's mainly the lager side, a little bit of dark, but mainly the lager. And then we've got a number of UK brands, so the Fuller's brands, London Pride and everything that fits under Fuller's, and their combined portfolio is around 500. And then we have all the Australian brands that we've recently purchased, which some of them have official distribution, some of them don't. Quite a lot of parallel, that sort of stuff, and that's probably around 500 as well. So yeah, they're brands for the future, not necessarily focused brands now.
And the split between draft and packaged?
Oh, I mean, you're asking at a bad time. We're coming out of a 3-month lockdown essentially. So this year, the whole beer market in Hong Kong is roughly 10% down year on year. And draft has obviously been the hardest hit. when all bars have been shut and all restaurants were closing at 6 p.m. up until the 19th of April. Yeah. So realistically, right now we're sitting 80-90% package, 10-20% draft.
Yeah, for super draft for the beers or for Peroni and the beers that Metabev has, I'd say it's still around 70% on trade.
Yeah,
which
Paul is actually touching on, I guess, a key problem/challenge for us is that Peroni for us as a brand is incredibly strong in the on trade. Traditionally, up until 2 years ago, we were 90% draft. Almost. It was 90% on trade, should I say? Very driven by bar trade, and then obviously COVID hit, and we've had to readapt the brand, and so now it's about 70-30, 80-20, I'd say, in between that, but still challenging.
Yeah.
And what else? The nuances and the differences between the markets. What else would be interesting for us South Africans?
Yeah, I think I guess from my side, I'll speak first and Paul can add. The interesting development to see has been e-commerce and sort of the rise of that, and even delivery, where you've got delivery platforms now doing quite a lot of beer. So here you have, there's two players that are like instantaneous delivery, and they're called Food Panda and Deliveroo, and you can sort of order food to your house immediately.
It's called Checkers 60 Minutes.
Yeah. I've heard Checkers has started doing quite a lot of delivery, but for here, bars and restaurants and supermarkets have started doing it sort of very normally, and that's had to become a big channel for us to focus on in terms of how do we get visibility and representation, and it actually becoming a volume driver for us. Particularly when there's lockdowns, when no restaurants are open past 6 p.m. and people need to order food, this is how they're doing it, and obviously beer is a part of that. I would say that's sort of been one of the most interesting things, and then also I guess the rise of 0.0 or non-alcoholic beer has been an interesting one. Obviously, from a regional perspective, I'm in contact with a lot more sort of people and see what 0.0 is doing in Europe and in other markets, and sort of how big it's becoming. And I would say Hong Kong's sort of probably 5 years behind everyone else, but obviously becoming a player in terms of it starting. Just today I was having a lunch with a friend who runs a 0% alcohol company, and it's wine, beer, spirits, everything. And it's sort of I would say a cutting edge industry, still very small volume, but there's definitely interest and there's definitely a growing market for it. So those are sort of the two most interesting ones for me that are emerging.
Yeah.
What about for you, Paul?
I think just maybe a more, let's say a more practical example is I think the sheer layout of the city, like Hong Kong is a city of 7.5 million people, but it's the size of, maybe half the size of Johannesburg, if even that. So it's a lot. It's very condensed in some areas. There's not a lot of places where you would go to have, apart from convenience stores and stuff like that. There's not a lot of places that you would go to, have beers or go out on a night out. So it makes it a bit more competitive. And now, one of the trends that we're seeing is that because it's so easy to have like cheap beers at 7-Eleven or Circle K or these convenience stores. Now people are taking note to maybe premiumize their beer offering, where in the past they wouldn't care if they're selling Carlsberg for $90 or brand X or brand Y for 10 at the 7-Eleven. It didn't matter. But now people are waking up to that because consumers are more conscious on the beer that they drink, on the selection.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one that's coming out, and maybe even more so with COVID, because I think financially everyone has been reassessing their budgets a little bit. So the average consumer, if they want to pay, 180, 150 Rand for a beer, they don't want to be paying for a beer that you can have for 20 Rand at a 7-Eleven. So that's an interesting trend that's coming out. And I think the way the city or the density of the city, I think it kind of fast tracks it in a way.
Yeah.
And it must be, I mean, with the density of the city, are there any craft breweries?
Oh, lots. Yeah. So I was actually another friend I met up with today who runs a craft brewery here. You actually have some very talented craft brewers out here, and there's definitely a market for it. I would say it's very hard to scale craft here in terms of in a meaningful way beyond certain volume thresholds. But my two favorite that I would say is one called Yardley Brothers in Hong Kong. Makes the most interesting beers I've seen out of Hong Kong, and they've actually just even launched their own brand. Their own bar. Really
quality focused, like really, really, really quality focused. Like that's almost all that matters to them.
Yeah, if I'm recommending someone look for like an interesting craft beer, it's Yardley Brothers, like 100%. And the quality, you never have a problem. Every beer is amazing. I've found with them. And then I would say there's two sort of players which I really respect in the market. One being Hong Kong Beer Co., which
the oldest craft brewery in Hong Kong or South China.
Yeah. And they've gone through a lot of iterations, but even in the last year, they've changed their brewing team and just some really quality guys coming through. And then it's a toss-up for me between Carbon Brews and Young Master. I don't know. Young Master is the largest craft brewing enterprise in Hong Kong. I would guess they sort of do 6,000 to 10,000 hex across their brands.
Yeah.
So they're not small by any means, and they do, I would say, great standards in Hong Kong in terms of like if you're looking for a standard pale ale or standard IPA, really good standards. And then you got Carbon Brews, which is actually a guy who's come from Carlsberg. He's a Carlsberg brewer, but he's sort of done this craft thing on the side as a project and made, I think, a really interesting brand and good beers.
Yeah, and excellent branding. They also think they have some sort of agreement with the brewery in Japan as well, so the liquid is really good. But yeah. So those top 3, 4, I guess you could call it that, or in terms of craft beers. Yeah, and there's quite a few more, but those are the.
There's a lot of others. Honestly, I'm amazed coming through COVID that so many of them are still alive, knowing what the market has been. As I was saying today, so some people, but those for me are the clear sort of winner brands in terms of craft beers. And you've seen a lot of them branch out in terms of having their own bars now. Carbon Brews, for example, has invested in a huge venue on the most expensive street in Hong Kong,
and it looks amazing.
I mean, they must be putting 2 million rand a month into rent. So it's a serious statement.
It's a statement,
piece. But it's very interesting.
And are these private individuals or are they big companies?
If you're a passionate brewer, there's people who are willing to sort of sponsor the dream where you can come in and take over operations.
Yeah, and another thing, I think Hong Kong is a very good spot it's a good city to start a craft beer brewery and then looking at expanding in the rest of Asia because of, the way the F&B industry is, or the dynamics of the F&B industry here. So a lot of these places will, establish, or these craft beer companies, they'll establish themselves in Hong Kong with the plan of, I'm investing now, building a brand, and then I'm taking it to China, and then I'm taking it to Singapore. So it's not, they're investing a lot here, but it's all with the bigger plan, obviously, of expanding.
Yeah.
Same as the lighthouse concept again.
Yeah. So you generally have 3 lighthouse markets in Asia, which are commonly agreed to be Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong. In terms of what those 3 do, the rest will follow. Singapore too, to a degree. Sorry, I should say that. I went to Singapore. So
it's a bit of a rivalry between Hong Kong and Singapore.
Hong Kong and Singapore are the highest investment markets, where it's very showy, I would say. And then South Korea and Japan are the volume ones, where if you start a trend there and then it's successful, you're going to make a lot of money, and it's very very fast moving.
Yeah. That goes out dog.
Yeah. An example I'll just give you for South Korea. A number of years ago, must have been 2016, I would guess, maybe 2017, really, that it took off. Our brand Kozel, we have a dark lager, which is very light, 3.8%, quite like light sweet caramel coffee flavor, I'd say. Became a sensation in South Korea for 2 years, where people were serving 400 ml pints topped with cinnamon in either the shape of a goat or in the shape of like a heart or whatever.
On the rim of the glass.
Yeah, or like a margarita style rim on the glass of the beer, cinnamon sugar. And it just went turbo, where we went from something like, 10,000 hectoliters to 250,000 hectoliters.
It's like a crypto.
We then had a trade war, which between Japan and Korea, which crashed us pretty hard. but it was fun while it lasted. I always say the brand is still very loved, but things can go from 0 to hero overnight.
Yeah.
And in terms of distribution, how does one deliver beer in Hong Kong?
Distribution is probably the hardest thing in Asia, and talking in the market and someone. So I've luckily, even if I haven't been directly involved in a number of distribution conversations, by nature of my job, I've been involved in sort of the understanding in the background. Distribution is the biggest challenge for most companies, and so it's how do you manage your distributor, how tightly do you hold the leash, and what do you look for. The more third world countries in Asia, the more difficult it becomes, because your options are incredibly limited, and so whether it's Philippines or Thailand or Vietnam, it's this is some wealthy family with connections that has a company that's going to help us out, or India, that sort of thing happens quite often. They have connections and they can distribute, and they can get us to a level where, we're comfortable then to go with someone else or to stay there for a number of years, whatever it may be. That's a big challenge though. And for big brands, you obviously have to avoid anything negative that may come along with distributors, which that combination around Asia can be difficult to find, quite frankly. I think Asahi's been lucky with their partners, and it's then just managing those relationships and trying to get as much transparency as you can, which is always challenging, because you want more information than they want to give you. So it's carrot and stick approach. What can you incentivize them to give you information as much as possible, and how can you constructively use your power with them, whether it's pricing or investment, to guarantee that. But that's always a balance, and honestly very difficult. And distribution, the challenge, I would say, specifically for Hong Kong, your logistics cost is very high.
Yeah, warehousing especially.
Yeah, so where space is a premium here, your warehousing is very expensive, and also getting around town in trucks is very expensive. So making that efficient is always a challenge.
Yeah, it's like that's saying something. But then looking at a country like China, with the sheer size of it and the population, it's, I don't want to say impossible, but I've heard some interesting stories about like
quality control is almost impossible at that point.
And kegs, like steel kegs that you obviously have to refill, disappearing, and like all.
There's a very interesting story that we won't tell on this, but I'll tell you offline about disappearing kegs in China. But there's challenges.
And what do the trucks look like?
We honestly use a lot of vans in Hong Kong.
Yeah. So the way our distribution is, or how our distribution works, is we obviously have set days that we deliver in certain areas, and then one van will go to the warehouse and pick up all the deliveries for maybe this small street or whatever, and then load it up with the kegs, load it up with the stock, and it's definitely something that we're improving on, and now we're getting bigger and bigger cars, and hopefully we'll have some lorries soon, especially with demand going up. But yeah, it's basically combis.
Yeah, essentially most of Hong Kong delivery, I would say, unless it's still like bars that are doing serious volume, are combis, and it's very much like this street, this combi goes here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a bit of a nightmare to organize, as you can imagine. And if you haven't told the driver you've got kegs that he's got to pick up, nightmare.
And if it's raining, like orders are delayed by hours.
Yeah, it's not
if it's raining, nothing moves in this city. And it rains all the time.
It's fun talking to you guys, and it's a real interesting picture. So how often do you travel to the other markets besides Hong Kong?
So I mean, Paul's based with a distributor in Hong Kong.
And you only do Hong Kong.
Yeah. So traditionally, I have always only been Hong Kong. However, that being said, pre-COVID, there was very much a understanding. They want us to go learn from other markets. And so sort of every 1 or 2 months, I travel to another market, whether it's Taiwan, Philippines, China, Korea. Korea was my most common destination, as that used to be one of our biggest markets in Asia. So yeah, there was a lot of learnings we were meant to sort of take from other markets and see the difference between them and us, and where everyone is in their stages.
And how often do you have to go to the Czech Republic to go have a look at the original brewery?
Yeah, so I got to go, I think 4 or 5 times. 5 times I got to go to the brewery out there and take some VIP trips and take customers along and make sure they enjoy things. That's a very important part of the job.
I've unfortunately never been.
Not important enough.
Yeah, as soon as I joined, the 3-week quarantine came into effect. And flights from Europe was banned for a while. So I'm very excited for borders to open, so I can.
Yeah. No, hopefully Paul will be one of the ones on the first trip out.
Yeah.
But it used to be honestly every month or second month I'd be traveling to some different market at least for a couple of days. But well, hopefully that returns. But as long as quarantine is involved in Hong Kong, probably not.
Yeah. Paul and James, thanks for sharing your stories and for sharing a beer with me.
Cheers.
I was very ill prepared on my side.
Yeah, where was yours?
What beer are you drinking?
It's been great chatting to you and just opening up our world a little bit to what's happening outside. I think we often just forget that there's rest of the world out there.
Oh, it's our pleasure, and thank you for having us on. We really appreciate it. All good.
Thank you for listening to our stories here online. In the show notes, you will also find a link where you can subscribe to become part of our community and be notified when we upload our latest content.